Okay, this is just a video to go over some numbers or things that you could have on a note sheet. So I have one here. You can email me if you'd like a PDF copy of this. But let me go ahead and go over each part. Here is a list of the prime numbers under 100. And sometimes those are handy, especially when you end up having factoring situations or you're simplifying radicals to know when to stop factoring. And what I did on the table here is I listed them kind of in their columns of if the number ends in 1 or 3 or 7 or 9. Notice 2 is the only even prime number. So any number that ends in 2 after won't be prime because it's divisible by 2. 5 is the only prime number that ends in 5 because any number that ends in 5 after won't be prime because 5 will go into that. So that's a tip that you might want to know. Then, if you're somebody who memorizes easily, knowing the powers of 2 will sometimes come in handy. And here's a list up to 10 to the 2 to the 10th. Powers of 3 will come in handy, and usually powers of 3 come in handy, especially to maybe right here. Powers of 5, usually right here. Okay, and then I've got a multiplication chart up to the 20s. But oftentimes, prime factorization, this lists kind of some common numbers. Notice prime factorization is when you take a number and you break down all the prime numbers that multiply to be. So say 10. 10 is 2 times 5. Those are both prime numbers. 12, yeah, you can write it as 6 times 2, but 6 is not prime. 4 times 3, 4 is not prime. So, and this comes in handy if you're going to simplify radicals, is you could write the prime factorization. Ooh, and there's a pair. So a 2 would come out, something like that. So here's a list of numbers that are prime factorization. And then what else do I have down here? How to find the greatest common factor between two numbers. And I have the instructions right there. You can do a screenshot. That way I'm not going over that. And the lowest common multiple. And then some perfect squares and perfect cubes. So one way to think about that, 2 squared is 4. So the square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 9, 3, so forth. Okay, over here to the cubes. Cube root of 1 is 1. And by the way, you can't take the square root of a negative number because a negative times a negative is positive. But for cubes, you can take the cube root of a negative number because look, a negative number times a negative number is a positive number. But remember, you have to multiply a negative number 3 times. A negative times a positive, we're back to negative. So you can take the cube root of both positive and negative numbers. So the cube root of positive or negative 1, you're going to get the cube root of positive 1 is 1. The cube root of negative 1 is negative 1. And same with the rest of it. You can take the cube root of negative 8. The answer would be negative 2. Okay, here's some numbers and a way to frame numbers that sometimes will help you out in testing situations.